Greetings. You are listening to Horror Nerds at Church, a ridiculously queer podcast where your hosts usually take a deep dive into a horror film and talk about how it connects to queerness, religion, and theology. But today, we're doing something a little different. Today, in celebration of their 100th episode, pretty cool, right? I have taken over the podcast to serve as the moderator to ask your questions. So, who am I? I'm Ben Monroe. I've spent most of my life in Northern California, where I live in the East Bay area with my family. I'm the author of In the Belly of the Beast and Other Tales of Cthulhu Wars, The Seething, the graphic novel Planet Apocalypse, and short stories in several anthologies. And now, wish I had a drum. I'd do a little drum roll, but I'll do my best. It's my pleasure to introduce the two co-hosts of Horror Nerds at Church. Pace Warfield is the creator and co-host of Horror Nerds at Church. They're a PhD candidate at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, where their research interests include Reformation history and queer theological anthropology. Pace is a lifelong horror fan, having grown up on franchises like A Nightmare on Elm Street and reading Stephen King. They live in Hopkins, Minnesota, where it's very cold right now, while they finish their dissertation, teach online courses, and watch a shit ton of horror, as God intended. Pastor Emily E. Ewing is the co-host of Horror Nerds at Church and creator and co-host of the Nerds at Church podcast. In addition to podcasting, they enjoy making drinks with Sabbath Sips, art with Roll for Art, and random preaching with Roll for Sermon on TikTok. Emily is a horror Padawan, enjoying wading into horror while still not yet watching the scary ones at night. They currently work as a pastor and mission developer focusing on creativity, spirituality, and healing in Balmer, Maryland. And throughout this episode, this live episode, remember we're live, so I can't say poop or fart or anything. Feel free to put your questions in the comments below, and we will try to get to as many as we can. And thank you to all who submitted the questions in advance. We'll get to those soon. And a special thank you to Susanna Porter, who is running the tech of this live episode, and River Cook Needham for helping to moderate the Facebook and YouTube comments and get your questions to us. So hopefully there's some people out there listening and watching, and you've got your fingers poised over the keyboard. So feel free to submit your questions in the Facebook chat or any other chats you happen to be watching us on. And we're going to answer as many as we can live and hopefully get them right, or at least not make complete goofs of ourselves. So how's everyone doing today?
Good.
It's a Sunday.
It's a Sunday. That's the church worker. It's Sunday.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That's the only day of the week you work, right?
Exactly. We only ever work on Sundays.
And you are the council well, it's a different name, but this vice president of your council or something like that, your church. Ben.
Oh, me? Yeah. VP of missions at our church.
So you know all about that fun stuff.
Oh yeah.
Indeed.
Seemed like a good idea at the time, and
it always does.
I'm waiting to term out.
Nice.
Okay, so it sounds like everyone's good. We're all getting cold, of course. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area here, so it's wimpy cold. But you guys are starting to deal with snow and sleet and wendigos and stuff, which happens.
We had sprinkling rain, so not nearly the cool cold that I prefer.
Right.
Just no snow.
We're
summoning it. Summoning the snow with the background.
There you go. And what have you guys been watching lately? Anybody watching any cool winter themed horror movies? Krampus or Silent Night, Deadly Night, anything like that?
I'm thinking about wading into Silent Night, Deadly Night because I haven't seen that one yet. We watched Krampus last year.
And covered it with Todd. And we did cover Silent Night, Deadly Night as part of season 2 before Emily was co-host. So you can go back and check out that episode with J.M. Longworth as the guest co-host. But Silent Night, Deadly Night 2 is almost, spoilers, almost entirely a rehash of Silent Night, Deadly Night 1. It's
Nice.
mostly like clips of the first one, so that they try to form into a coherent narrative. So I
Ooh.
feel like you could pick right up with that one in a one of these years and just keep going for that whole franchise. Um,
You just only ever talk about that and see if anybody notices.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I also have been reading, in addition to our podcast reading of the Star Wars from a certain point of view books, I have also been reading The Hex Next Door, which is from an indie publisher, um, which is a very queer, spooky themed. I don't think it's actually horror, at least so far it's not, but has some spooky themes, which is fun.
Nice. Yeah,
I
horror is kind of a. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I haven't yet figured out what I want to watch, but I really want to catch Eli Roth's Thanksgiving while it's in see that. Beyond that, I haven't been watching too much horror lately. A lot of Star Wars. Can you imagine why with the upcoming Star Wars season?
Can't imagine why. I
Yeah.
mean, that's its own kind of horror. Like the number of times that I have now watched the Ewoks holiday special,
Oh my
that's
gosh.
its own kind of horror.
Oh, like Caravan of Courage or something? Or
Yeah.
Yeah,
oh my
that's the
gosh.
one. I don't think I need to watch it again for, I believe the timeline is 40 years, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
I
seems
can
about right.
let that one rest for 40 years.
Nice, nice. I saw one last year. I think it was called The Conversation. It was a Shudder original. Really good holiday themed horror story. I think it was called The Conversation. I'll have to look it back up. Um, and it's one of those pressure cooker, two people stuck in a cabin in the snow kind of things. Um, and a very interesting psychological piece. So not really, it gets kind of gory toward the end, but not really your typical. When people think horror, they often think Saw, Friday the 13th. This
Yeah.
was not so much like that. So you're on Star Wars now, which is awesome. I know the podcast, obviously Horror Nerds at Church started a few years ago talking about just horror. Pace, I'm always kind of curious, how did you come up with the idea for the podcast in the first place? What was the origin story, the villain or hero or otherwise?
Ooh, good question. So yeah, this is one of the frequently asked questions we get a lot here. And the story is kind of simple in that Emily Ewing had an amazing podcast already going, Nerds at Church. And it had just recently done its rebranding into Nerds at Church from what it used to be, HP at Church. And so they were asking for help thinking of some nerdy connections to the Bible as that podcast does. And so I was helping like brainstorm some ideas for that week's scripture readings, and I just kept coming up with horror references. And Emily's like, that's not quite the scope of this podcast. And so I made a joke, infamous joke.
Oh,
There should be a spin-off podcast called Horror Nerds at Church. Fast forward 3 months, and Pace is starting a podcast called Horror Nerds at Church, a spinoff from Nerds at Church. And so, like, it really started off as just like this offhanded comment, and then it kind of grew into its own thing back in 2021. We started March 25th of 2021. So, but I can't believe we put out 100 episodes in between then and now.
Right? That is amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember our introduction from the Nerds at Church podcast to the Horror Nerds at Church podcast was the Easter episode on Was Jesus a Zombie? It was a great episode. We went through zombie, vampire, like so many different options of like the resurrected Christ, what possibly is going on there. It was really
right.
fun with
Nice.
the previous co-host Joe and Pace.
Yeah.
There you go. And Emily, I'm kind of curious. Since you've said a few times that you're new to the genre and you've kind of taken a deep dive under Pace's tutelage over
It's
the
true.
last last year or so. Is there anything in all these films you've seen for the first time? Anything surprising you've learned about the horror
Uh,
aesthetic or genre?
yeah, I used to occasionally watch scary movies. And then I watched Silence of the Lambs in the middle of the afternoon by myself in January when I was in college, and like I couldn't sleep that night. So I was like, I'm done with scary movies. And coming back to scary movies, it's been really interesting to see what stuff I am like really into and what stuff I'm like, that's not for me. Like our first season was Twilight. So the horror in Twilight is the actual movie series itself, right?
Right.
Um, and the story and Stephanie Meyer and all of that terrible, terrible movie theology and stuff. But then we watched the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and I realized that like body horror is actually like not something I'm interested in. But last season we did ghosts, and I love ghost stories because they're like detective stories, right? There's some mystery because ghosts are like unsettled spirits. There's something unresolved. And so you got to figure out what is the unresolved thing. So whenever there's something like that where I'm like, okay, there's something going on, um, I really like it. And I we have a tradition of naming our favorite kill. And I was
Right.
like, I don't know if I'm into it. I'm into it. You can pretty much predict that like whoever is the biggest jerk that gets killed, that's who my favorite kill is going to be. So it's like easy
Right.
to predict my favorite kill, but like I did not expect to enjoy naming my favorite kill nearly as much
Right.
as I
Right.
have done.
Right.
But yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. And I guess this is a question for both of you. We'll start with Emily since they just were talking about the stuff they've been looking into. What's your favorite franchise or film you've covered so far in the podcast? You've done a lot.
Yeah, we have done a lot. Um, I really love, oh, that is so hard. There are so many. I really love Ghostbusters for the ways that that franchise and that season kind of bridge the gap between horror and science fiction type stuff.
Okay.
I think it's a pretty good entry episode. But also I loved doing Children of the Corn because in college I did a January term in Ecuador, and our professor was supposed to be off for that January term, and so only came with us for like the first week and then was gone. And we were the best behaved of the schools participating. So we got nicknamed the Children of the Corn before I had ever seen the movie. And so I just knew it was something about like children without parents. There's something suspicious. So it was fun to like watch that movie and then see see what the actual reference was.
Right. I've often said that there's absolutely nothing ever good happens in a cornfield. Anytime you watch a movie and there's a cornfield coming, it's like, all right, this is about to go off the rails.
It's true. It's true.
Oh my gosh, I love Children of the Corn. It's such total cheeseball. What
Yeah.
about you, Pace? What's your favorite one you guys have covered so far?
Well, that's so hard.
That's a
And
tough question.
right, I keep threatening Emily though that we are going to watch the rest of the Children of the Corn franchise since there are 12 entries in that franchise, and each one gets
There's 12?
worse than the one before.
I don't
Yes.
think I knew
Oh
there
my
were that
gosh.
many.
The Urban Harvest one I actually really enjoyed. That was pretty fun. And the one with Fred Williamson. Everything with Fred Williamson is good. But I'm sorry, go back. What was
Children
your
of the
favorite so
Corn
far?
666, Isaac's Return. I just love that
Yeah, yeah,
title. Because of course you have to have 666 in there. But anyway, my favorite, I don't know. This is hard. One of my favorite franchises always growing up was Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. Both of those, like growing up with those. So it's fun to finally cover those both. Uh, one of my favorite movies that we've covered that not many people know about, and I wish more people did, is the movie Sunshine from 2007.
Mhm.
It's a
Uh-huh.
sci-fi space
Oh,
movie
it's so
by
good.
Brennan Boyle. Really good. So I was really happy to cover that one and introduce more people to that. So definitely go out and check out that movie if you haven't. Huge cast in that too. Michelle Yeoh, Christopher Evans, all sorts of stuff like that. But yeah, I'd say that. My least favorite one, the franchise we've covered though, is Twilight. That's pretty easy.
Yeah, that seems like an easy choice.
It was uh, it was really fun when I came up with the idea to cover Twilight, and then after we watched the second one, I remember saying to Emily, like, "There's three more of these that I have to sit through. Three."
I feel like that's a little bit the brilliance of the idea to do a Predator marathon for our movie commentaries for our upcoming season, and then
Nice.
the practicality of actually sitting through 5 Predator movies in 24 hours.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I got the genius idea last summer. I think Mandalorian season 3 was coming out, and I decided,
Mhm.
I got to catch up on Star Wars. I've been a lifelong Star Wars fan, but I missed a lot, especially the TV show stuff.
Mhm.
Holy moly! I tried to do I tried to watch all of Clone Wars and Rebels. I think I was like one season in. I'm like, okay, I need some highlights here. Just what are the core episodes? Because I
Hey,
cannot devote the
okay.
next.
So I did the same thing. I hadn't really watched the Star Wars TV shows, just the like movies and then the new Mandalorian and that sort of thing.
Right.
Pace made a list for me, particularly of Clone Wars episodes that were like episodes to watch and then optional episodes if you want a little bit more.
Right.
But it like gave me permission to skip a whole bunch of the ones that just needed to be skipped.
Yeah. Well, I found on Disney Plus they have what they call the essential episodes, kind of the stuff to get
Mm,
you up to
mhm.
speed. And there was only like 20 of those. I'm like, all right, this is much easier. And then I found a list online for Rebels, which was maybe 16, 17 episodes. Okay, get
Nice.
through all that.
Yeah. I
And
watched all of the Rebels episodes. I liked those. Those were fun. But Clone Wars was too many episodes.
long.
Seven
Oh,
seasons.
back to
Bad.
horror. Okay. Oh my gosh. I'm looking at some of the questions here that were submitted earlier. So here's a question for Emily, submitted by River, friend of the podcast. Of all the horror franchises you haven't seen, ones you haven't seen, which are you most looking forward to?
That's a really good question. Right now I'm looking forward to the Alien series because we're on the um we're about to do the Star Wars Alien franchise. Um, I am both looking forward to and a little bit anxious about the Exorcist series. Pace keeps threatening the Exorcist series, and it's like perfect fodder for horror nerds at church. So I know we're gonna do it. I just it was actually a little bit scary when we watched it for our 99th episode
Oh yeah.
um with TJ Tranchel. And so yeah, I'm like, it's a little intimidating, but I'm also looking forward to it because there is so much theologically and religiously, particularly as a pastor, to like tear apart on any sort of horror, but also especially exorcisms.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Not a lot of Lutheran horror though, now that I think about it, is there?
No, I
No.
mean,
Maybe that's an unserved market. I don't know.
or maybe we're just horrific enough without making up movies. I didn't
Oh
say
my
that out
gosh.
loud. Bishop Gold's on vacation. We're fine.
Exorcist, yeah, I'm trying to think. I know I've watched the original and I watched the episode, the third one, in recent memory. I skipped over number two when I watched him again a little while ago. I found out that the third film was actually based on the original sequel novel to The Exorcist from
Mm,
William Blatty, the original author. So I think those two tie together pretty well. So I hope you enjoy
nice. Thanks.
them. Here's a question for Pace. I got a lot for both of you, and then one for each of you here. For Pace, what this is submitted again by River. What franchise are you most interested to experience Emily's first reaction to, and how do you think they will react to that series?
Oh, this is such a great question. Thank you, River. Um, I will say it was fun getting Emily to watch the first Friday the 13th after having already seen
Mm.
Freddy versus Jason, because they
Mm.
went into that with a whole bunch of preconceived notions about who the villain might be in that movie and stuff. And so it was really fun to just be like, nope. So there's still 11 movies left, plus the new series they just announced. Thank God they're reviving Friday the 13th. Love it. So I would love to like what to have you watch through the rest of the series. Our For those of you at home, if you're a Patreon supporter, our plan is every time there's a Friday the 13th day, we are going to drop an episode on Patreon of that.
Mhm.
So that way Emily can catch up since we've already covered it in season two. Beyond that, though, see, I'm tempted to say something like gruesome, like Saw would be fun to see Emily's reaction to, but but even more so, I think something like Leprechaun or something just absolutely weird. Hellraiser, like one of those franchises that just takes such a weird left turn in the middle and they go to space.
Right.
That would be really fun to just explore with somebody for the first time, I
Yeah.
think.
I
So
love space and I loved Sunshine when we covered Sunshine. So I think that's a great idea. I'm here for it.
Hellraiser, Bloodlines, and Leprechaun in Space are not particularly things I would think of that you would love when we get to those.
I mean, maybe, but
I
I
like
love
that
space.
space. So I'm
I,
excited.
I do remember trying to convince a coworker years ago, it's back in the 90s, I think, that they needed to watch Hellraiser. Oh, Hellraiser, it's a classic. It's like, 8 years old at that point. And so she went to the video store, rented it. She's like, I hate it. It was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I'm like, well, what didn't you like? She's like, I didn't understand. Like, back in time and then up in space. I'm like, wait, you started with episode like 5 or something.
Yeah.
So no, 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 no. You only watched the first 2. Skip all the others. Oh my
Ooh,
gosh.
I changed my answer. The one I'm most excited for Emily to watch, and one of these days we're going to do this franchise, is George Romero's of the Dead franchise.
Oh yeah,
That would be
Mm.
so cool. And the theological discussions we can get into with that, really good.
Hmm.
So I'm excited.
absolutely. No, those are classics, and that's actually I've noticed it's a series that's really consistently well remade. The
Hmm.
remake of Night of the Living Dead and the remake of Dawn of the Dead were both really good. That's not something you see often. I
Does
think
Shaun of
they're
the Dead count in that?
Possibly. Well, it
let's
depends
just
how
say it does.
broadly we want to. Yeah. Depends how
I
broadly
feel
we want
like
to
it's
do
like
that.
Ghostbusters.
It's one of if we do
Casper
the
counted.
of the Dead, it's another one similar to Godzilla. Like Godzilla is another franchise I cannot wait to cover. But it's like there are so many entries in the of the Dead franchise, especially if you count like the unauthorized spin-offs like Zombie 2 and stuff like that, that it just becomes
Mm.
like 60 movies that we have to try to cover. So we have to pare it down a little bit. So I'm not quite sure how
Have you
to.
done
That's fair.
have you done full cheese? Because you've got 100 episodes. I've lost track. Have you done full cheese Gates of Hell series yet? That's only
I have
3.
not. I really want to.
Those are
Mm.
interesting. I had kind of have a love hate relationship with those. Like I feel like I really should like them more than I do, and then yet I still go back and watch them all about once a year,
Mm.
even though like I'm in the middle of the third one. Like, why am I doing this to myself?
That's what it's
There
like.
are a couple holiday movies that are like that for me. I rewatch Holiday in the Wild every year because it has elephants, not because it's quality filming. But also, I want to change my answer to reverse question because I forgot. No, not to reverse question, to one of the other questions. I love Jordan Peele. That is one of the things that I've learned on this podcast. Anything that
Nice.
Jordan Peele is involved with, I want to see. So that's Nope, that's the Candyman remake. There are so many like just phenomenal horror movies connected to Jordan Peele. So that is my like,
Absolutely.
that's the one I really love.
For
If you
clarity,
watch,
Jordan Peele was a producer on Candyman, Nia
Mm.
DaCosta.
Yeah, yeah.
I was gonna say if you watch the recent Candyman, make sure to go back and watch the original one.
We
And
did.
it's okay. There you go.
Yeah, we
That's
watched,
a
I think it was a movie commentary for the original and then an
okay.
episode for the new one.
Nice, because that's a great. We've seen a lot of this in the last couple of years with horror, where people are coming back and saying, "Oh, you just ignore all the sequels. This is going right back to the first one." The recent Halloween trilogy was like that, and the new Candyman was very much the same. It's like just watch that one, watch the original. You've got a solid story because there were a couple sequels to the original Candyman, which were, they were very '90s franchise sequel fodder kind of things. They weren't that great. They were forgettable. Have you watched Scream yet? That's kind of a fun meta.
Not.
That, that's something that I'm excited to introduce them to as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
was
those are what
waiting to get through a little bit more horror so that way they could get some of the meta jokes in there.
right. I was just going to say, once you've kind of got your feet grounded, you know,
Hmm.
then I think you'll appreciate Scream a lot more than coming into it blind.
Yeah.
Let's go back to some of these questions here. A question from Toby. Toby asks, I guess for either one of you, what's your most unexpected horror and theology crossover you've come across yet?
Mm. I wish we should have gotten our list of like all the episodes we've ever done. I think
Like,
the like everything everywhere all at once and the and we also did Doctor Strange in the multiverse. Like
Uh-huh.
the ones that deal with the multiverse, I think are really interesting to talk about. They're not exactly horror scary in the same way, but I really liked them. And I think I we watched because there is a now 5.5-year-old in my life who I love. We watched Vampirina for a BooTube episode, and that was delightful because it's horror in the sense of like vampires and like monsters and stuff, but it's for little kids and it's done really well, and so it actually gives you a lot of good things to talk about and like lessons and that sort of thing while also being horror-ish and horror-y.
Spooky and fun, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha.
uh, I'm gonna focus for the answer on this question is unexpected because there are a lot of movies I went into like knowing we could talk a lot about the theology of this movie. Like The Exorcist, for instance, one that just is ripe for that. But
Hmm.
was very surprised by the depth of theological conversation we had for the first Twilight with TJ Tranchel of
Mm. Hmm.
unpacking the Methodist kind or Methodist, whoa, pace. Not
LDS,
Methodist,
Mormon.
LDS. It's Sunday, y'all. LDS theology in those
Right.
in those movies. So that was one. And then Wicker Man, which I kind of
Oh,
it
yeah.
would be a good one, but our guest, blanking on his name,
Howard.
Howard.
Howard Ingham.
Uh, yeah, Howard
Yeah.
Ingham was fantastic, and we really were able to get into some deep theology there as
Mhm.
well, and that was just really fun episode as well. So I would say those two probably stand out to me
Yeah.
as the most unexpected deep theological.
I think I was also unexpectedly drawn in by the Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1 and Nightmare on Elm Street. Which one was
Part
it?
five, The Dream Child.
Yeah, the Dream Child one, Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Dream Child, which we had Susanna on, and she's a former president of Now New Jersey. And so like digging into the way they're like the amount of anti-choice propaganda was really fascinating to me because it
Mm.
didn't register for me the first time I saw the Twilight movie, Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1. But like watching it with her and talking about it with her was just like, oh wow, this is like insidious. Like everywhere in pop culture is this like anti-choice propaganda. Um, so
Interesting.
that was also really fascinating for me.
I feel
Yeah.
like the horror in Twilight. I watched those movies a few years ago when my kids were younger and kind of into them. Um, it's nothing about the monsters per se. It's not like the vampires aren't scary, the werewolves aren't scary. They're just kind of goofing around. It's this whole
Mhm.
Romeo and Juliet thing. But it's like the fact that you got this series of books starring that the main character is 200 years old, hangs out in high schools picking up girls. That's really creepy.
Mhm.
Not even like
Yeah.
really. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's not even really funny creepy. It's like just go away,
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
do something else.
Yeah.
I mean, just the idea of having to go back to high school after 200 years is bad enough, but
Right.
no thanks.
I will
Oh
pass.
my gosh.
Not my
So actually
best.
some really fun early submission questions here. Let's see if anybody comes up with anything from here. Kay asks, most practically dressed person in a horror film who's not murdering anybody. Bonus points if they aren't male. I got one for this actually. If I can jump in first,
Yeah.
Oh,
uh, Barbara in the remake of Night of the Living Dead. She starts off as a total wilting flower. And about halfway into the movie, she gets in this whole farmer's outfit, cargo pants and a flannel shirt. And because her regular clothes were wrecked by being chased by zombies. And then she goes out and kicks zombie asses. She's technically not murdering anybody, but I think she killed a zombie or two. So I think Barbara from the remake of Night of the Living Dead, she was pretty great.
Nice.
How about you
I
guys?
I have to say Ghostbusters, the 2016
Uh huh.
Ghostbusters, all of them really well dressed. Like Kristen Wiig's character is not necessarily at the very, very beginning, but immediately, like once they form their group, um, and both of the other two are from the start. Very well, like they've got their jumpsuits to protect them, and they've got good shoes for running and solid dressing, not men, not male, and not murdering.
Yeah,
mhm.
So
very, very
they're,
practical outfits.
yeah. What about you, Pace?
I don't know. I feel like the movies we've covered haven't had too much impractically dressed people. So like most of the ones we've covered have been pretty well. Um, so I guess I'll go the opposite and say the most impractically dressed for me is a tie between two. The first one is The Passion of the Christ when we covered that movie.
Oh gosh.
And when Jesus is wearing his little loincloth and is getting destroyed in this absolute like splatterfest gore
Yeah.
level. I feel like that was very impractical and also not historically accurate. And
Hmm.
then the other one that I would say is in Ghost when they're doing pottery and Patrick Swayze is like shirtless and stuff, and they're getting pottery everywhere. I'm like, that doesn't seem very practical either when you're doing your
Well, you wouldn't want to stain your regular clothes with clay, just do it naked, I guess. I don't know.
right, right. Why not?
Easier to wash
Yeah.
off. Oh my gosh. How about oh, here we go. So Kay asked the dress one. Here's another from Kay. Favorite jump scare where there was actually nothing to be afraid of.
Okay. So we keep track of jump scares mostly because of me, because I new to horror and I jump scare easily. When I'm paying complete attention to the movie, so what has happened is the movie commentaries is where there are the most jump scares. And I think it was when we were watching Sleepy Hollow. Our Patreon supporters will have to like confirm or deny this. But in Sleepy Hollow, like there were a couple jump scares that were like from the movie. But at one point, Gandalf barked.
Yeah, my dog, Gandalf.
Is his
In
dog?
case you're wondering, like,
Yeah,
why is Lord of the Rings character showing up in Sleepy Hollow?
right? Yeah, no,
Ian
not
McKellen
Michael
just happened
Gambon.
to be wandering by, and
Yep.
But Pace's dog Gandalf barked, and I had the biggest jump scare. Nothing was happening in the movie that like prompted that was like going to make me jump scare, but that was definitely I was like
nice.
gone for that one.
Yeah, I don't really jump scare much, so I can't really answer this question myself, sadly.
Mm.
So there's you'll still have this to look forward to, Emily, but I think maybe most horror fans are in agreement that the greatest jump scare of all time is in Exorcist 3. And I'm sure Pace knows exactly, he's nodding, or they're nodding, they know exactly what I'm talking about. And oh my gosh, yeah, you have that to look forward to.
Okay.
Um,
Because I did jump scare when the priest like jumped out of the window. I was not ready. I was not expecting that at all. So that was a jump scare for me. But
oh my gosh, yeah, the Exorcist 3 one. That's a phone. I think you pretty much talk to any horror fan, ask them, "Oh, what'd you think of the jump scare in Exorcist 3?" They've got an opinion because they all know it. It was maybe one of the first ones, excuse me, that really got me. I saw the Exorcist.
mm,
So no, that was the second one. That really, first one was an Alien. The Exorcist 3 was the one that really got me when I saw it in the theater. Like it just because the rest of the movie, it's not a jump scare movie. It's a really kind of subtle, and then slow burn, slow build kind of thing. And then this thing happens. Whoa, that was unexpected and not called for at
mm.
all. But thank you. Oh my gosh. Let's look at some more questions here. We got a few more. Most practically dressed. We did the franchise. Who's your favorite guest you've ever had on your show, Pace?
Hmm.
Okay, I
I love
have to I have to I have to come clean on this. This is from Brooke, and Brooke was a guest for the 2016 Ghostbusters. So
Nice.
she has a particular perspective on why she's asking the question, but go for it,
I,
Pace.
I'm sure Brooke
Oh
is
my gosh.
perfectly nice person.
So let's see. Since we have three guests listening in this Zoom right now, yeah, one of the best parts, in all seriousness, one of the best parts about doing Horror Nerds at Church is all the cool people we've gotten to have on the podcast and talk to and stuff like that. So I can't really pick a favorite. I can't even pick a least favorite. Like every guest we've had so far has been incredible. Brooke, of course, you're one of my all-time favorites. You're welcome back on the podcast anytime. Same with you, Susanna, River, Ben, all of you. And Ben and Susanna are presently like neck and neck as to who is the most guest appearances on Horror Nerds. I think, and because you're both on this one, I mean, you're both kind of
Just keeping it neck and neck.
yeah,
Right.
just neck and neck. But
So it's like a Godzilla versus Kong thing here.
yeah, yeah.
I will
Oh my gosh.
say, though, related to that, I'm also not going to claim a favorite because of the same reasons that Pace said. But nice try, Brooke. Um, I we've been doing so during the writers and actor strikes, we put our sixth season kind of on pause because there were like there was a thing for influencers not to promote struck companies, right? And so in order to watch all of our movies and all of the TV shows and stuff, you kind of have to be part, like you kind of have to have Disney Plus. And so that would be promoting Disney Plus, and we didn't want to. So we put it on pause until the strikes are over, which they're now over. So we're starting in January. But what we did in the meantime is we've been doing a book season, a book like
Hmm.
mini season. And that has been fantastic. I haven't ever been like a horror book reader, really. But we've read some really great ones, and I really enjoy short story style ones. Um,
Nice.
but I loved Frankenstein's Book of Prayer, which,
With the author, yeah.
yeah, I we we did it, yeah, with the author Steve Case. But that particular, like the particular niche of horror and theology is, and like Book of Common Prayer, horror, Frankenstein. It was fantastic. I love that book. And yeah, so that's probably my favorite book season series
Nice.
episode. Although
Yeah, well,
Remains to Be Told is like a very close second.
you can never go wrong with Frankenstein.
It's
Hmm.
true. It's true.
Yeah, our book season, we just, I don't know, I don't know why people keep saying yes. So thank you to all of you guests who keep saying yes to us. But like this season, we had Lee Murray, Nikki Lee, Jackie Greaves, Kristen McKenzie, all from Remains to Be Told. Ben Monroe, you're such an accomplished horror author yourself. Uh, check out his book, The Seething, by the way. Such a good book. And I feel like that's your
Thank you.
background is
Yes.
reference. eating.
Yeah, that was a photo of not exactly when I had the moment of inspiration, but the area where I had the moment of inspiration for the book. So you can even see the little island back there.
Yep.
Nice.
And Steve Case and Claudia Gray as the other two authors we've had on this season so far. All fantastic. So.
Nice. So it's talking about the writers and the strike and what you've been doing kind of around that does make me wonder, are there actually I note here, any thoughts to movies that you just would not want to cover on the podcast? Anything you just don't want to talk about or promote? And I guess by saying you don't want to, now you're going to promote them, but
I mean, anti-promote them? So I will go first. That's okay. So we had talked about the way we've talked about the seasons is doing like a big horror franchise season and then a like themed minisode season. So that's where Ghosts and Ghostbusters, Vampires and Twilight have come in. And we talked about doing a werewolf one. And in the beginning, I was like, if we do a werewolf season, I really want to do Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban because there's just a lot to do there. And since then, I mean, at that stage, we were like, I was like on the edge with J.K. Rowling.
Sure.
And our initial, like Nerds at Church, the predecessor podcast to that was HP at Church, as in Harry Potter at Church. So I was already like kind of moving away from J.K. Rowling because of how transphobic she is, among also being super racist, super colonialist. But I like there is a thing about Prisoner of Azkaban that I think is really good and important to talk about, but also I just am past the point where I can promote anything that she has done. And so that is no longer one of the, if we do a werewolf season, one of the movies that we would watch.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that totally makes sense. And how about you, Pace?
Yeah, there are a few. There's one franchise in particular that I'm not gonna name here because of reasons, but like the creator is just a really not good person, and has been accused of sexual assault and stuff, and just is not repenting for any of that or showing any remorse, and just so it's like by doing his film franchise, we would be leading people into that world and also giving him money and stuff. So that's one that I just very clearly do not want to do. And similar with like Harry Potter is another franchise I just won't cover right now. There are a few movies though, and few franchise like any movie like that where it's very everybody's complicated. We're all human. Everybody makes mistakes, but where people are just like using the money they make to further promote harm and stuff like that is the line for me. But as far as content, there's very little on like I would totally be down to do an episode on something like Cannibal Holocaust or something. There's not anything that I feel like is too gross. Maybe not a Serbian film. We probably won't do that one. But beyond that, like there's not too much content wise I don't think we would cover on the podcast because all of it can bring about good conversation about like even if bad stuff is happening, you can talk about what makes it bad or why it's harmful, those kind of things. So
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I probably know exactly the franchise you're talking about, and it's weird. There's a lot of films I've seen where I just even watching the movie, I get like just a creepy feeling out of it, and not like a fun horror creepy feeling, just like I don't know, guys. Something weird's going on here. There's a movie I've seen, which I will also not name. It's one of two films I've never managed to finish. One was Cannibal Holocaust. The other was this other film. And I've named it a few times in conversation, talking about like, what's the worst movie you've ever seen? And, I went to film school. I've seen a lot of bad movies. And I bring this one up and people will instantly, oh, I got to go check that out. Like, no, you really don't. Please trust me. And even like they'll watch the trailer, and oh my God, what the hell is this? I'm like, I told you not to watch it.
Yeah.
It's
And
terrible.
that's
So,
that's I think one of the tricky parts, particularly in horror, because there are a lot of like cult classics in horror,
right,
and like bad movies are not necessarily bad movies, right? Like if they are just like poorly made or B horror, like there's so many horror films that people still want to do, um, and still want to watch, even if it's like poorly made or the like
right.
12th version of The Exorcist or whatever. Um, so it's harder to like name this movie is bad for for like reasons that mean you shouldn't watch it, right? Like
Right.
that distinction I think is harder to make in horror than in other movie genres because of that particular thing. I don't know if
Yeah,
that
I
makes
think you're right. I think no, I know what you're saying. I think especially back in the late '60s into the early to mid '70s, that the kind of the grindhouse cinema. Um, it was so easy to make a film cheaply back then that a lot of real sleazy movies got made, um, and uh, and some of them just aren't worth really anyone's time. I think I don't Pace ever watch anything by Herschel Gordon Lewis. He's kind of on the borderline of just don't watch his stuff. His
sense.
movies are kind of sleazy and gross and cheaply made. Sometimes he almost approaches something like artistic merit, but then he just kind of takes a left turn. I mean, I guess to sum up Herschel Gordon Lewis, he decided that making sleazy exploitation films in the 60s and 70s wasn't sleazy enough. So he got into direct mail advertising after he left film. So he's got lots of books on Amazon you can find about how to, you know,
Hmm.
write marketing copy that sizzles and things like that. So interesting character. Oh my gosh. Well, there are definitely some bad ones out there. I'll bring my notes back up here. I'm just kind of skimming to see if we've got any more questions we haven't covered yet, stuff that's come in.
Also, if you're
Um,
watching and you have questions, put them in the chat and River will pop them in our
yeah,
chat.
send them on over. What else? Uh, did I ask what's your favorite movie or franchise you've covered? What's your least favorite? Can't remember. Did we already talk
Yeah,
about that one?
yeah, we did that
I'm
one.
trying to jump back and forth. Yeah, okay. Um, so we just asked, are there any movies you will not cover on the podcast? But here's another good one. What's the scariest movies you've ever seen? And if you haven't talked about it on the podcast yet, will it ever get talked about? Will you ever cover that one?
So my answer is easy. Um, Silence of the Lambs is the scariest movie I have ever seen. Um, I like it was in the realm of like psychological thriller for me, that like that was the scary part. That it got in my head and I couldn't get it out. I don't know if we will ever get to it on the podcast. I imagine Pace wants to get to it.
There's so much transphobia to talk about in that movie. I can't wait. We need to talk about just for that.
Yeah, but that's not happening anytime very soon. I I gotta get all of the tropes down before I start watching the like super duper duper scary ones.
For me, this is hard because again, I've been watching horror since I practically came out of the womb. So it's like, what's scary for me? Like horror is not scary for me anymore. It's very rare that I see a movie that like I generally feel scared or get a jump scare for or anything like that. But one of the scariest movies I've seen recently, though, I would say Hereditary is up there. It's
Mm,
just really like the anxiety is high the entire movie from beginning to end, and it just there's no release or relenting of that. And so it's something I definitely want to cover on the podcast at some point, just kind of waiting until I feel like Emily is ready to wade into those waters. We already covered Midsummer, one of his other films on the podcast, which was really fun from season one, but Predatory
Did you
robot
do
we'll get to.
did you do The Witch yet?
We have as part of season 2, so Emily
Oh,
wasn't
Okay.
part of that
I
one
was
yet.
like, I didn't see that. We have talked about a witch season. So
Yeah, that'll
Nice.
definitely be a movie commentary because we'll have to revisit it so Emily can watch it. Still one of the best witch movies ever made, I think. Do you want to live deliciously? Yes, I do. Thank you.
I was in the supermarket a couple of years ago and I saw, was it McCormick Spices? That was their slogan, live deliciously. I'm like, nope, not gonna buy it. Thank you.
Right, right.
Not
You
going
got
there.
to bring Satan into my household. Thank you.
Especially with all that extra MSG. Um, oh my gosh. I'm looking for any new no new live questions yet. Uh well, what do you guys have coming up that you're kind of excited about? What are you, maybe give us a preview of the next time you're going to talk about horror? I know we're deep into Star Wars land right now, and
yeah.
I know you're doing Predator soon. But what are some
Oh,
thoughts about things you might want to do
so this
in the
is
future?
a good time to mention that we actually, this is not answering your question at all, but Susanna
That's okay.
reminded me that we have a merch store and you can get things like, oh no, things like this. Let me just make
The
everything
mug of
disappear.
invisibility.
This the mug of invisibility that says queer nerds at church. There's also trans nerds at church, all sorts of things. You can get all sorts of shirts from our like to NB to transition to NB not to transition. um I was gonna, that's what I was gonna wear. I was gonna wear my Christmas one that looks a lot like this background but is green.
Would have just
um
blended in.
what?
You would have just blended in. It would have been invisible Emily against your background.
I mean, maybe it's true. That's fair. But so you can buy merch from us at bit.ly/nerds at church merch. Just capitalize the first letter of each word. And we have all sorts of different things. I have masks that I wear every week in worship, and they are liturgically appropriate colors. So I just got to pull out my blue one because I was preaching at a church that pushed Advent up a little bit. But yeah, we have everything from like phone covers and stickers and oh, look, stickers. Speaking of, there's a sticker and there's a sticker because I put stickers on water bottles because that's what I do.
Yep.
Yeah, so definitely check out our merch store.
Yeah,
Uh,
I almost wore my Camp Horror Nerds at Church. Friend of the podcast, Eugene Johnson, did this whole nerdy campers of classic horror movies. So there's the Nosferatu, there's the Frankenstein and stuff. So that was our very first line of merch on there, still up there and such and so fun. So I almost wore that, but didn't. So instead I'm wearing my Freddy Krueger Christmas sweater, which is not on our merch store, but you can find on the internets.
Also appropriate. Most of our merch store honestly is designed by Pace, aside from the campers,
Cool.
which is fantastic. But yeah.
Nice.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna try and get back to your question, so keep
Yeah,
going.
do that. And then I'll have another one for you.
Okay. Um, I love Star Wars, so I'm really excited for the Star Wars series. But when we recorded our Predator movie commentaries, I was surprised by how much I really liked the newest Predator movie. I don't
Prey.
remember.
It's
Prey.
Prey.
called Prey.
I
Called
haven't
Prey.
seen it yet, and I really wanted to, so I'm
It's
looking forward to that one too.
fantastic. It's fantastic. I'm here for it. So that's the last one of our movie commentaries coming out next season. So you have to be one of our Patreon supporters, which you can become a Patreon supporter by going to patreon.com/horror nerds at church. And you can be a Patreon supporter at either our horror nerd or horror buff level to get our movie commentaries. But that was just like a really fun movie, and I really enjoyed it.
Yep,
So
and we sat through all 5 Predator films for you. That's how much we love you all.
indeed, indeed.
The middle ones get a little weird, like Predator
Yeah.
2, Predators. the Predator.
They're
How many
also named
Predator,
single
terribly.
can we have?
Predator
Aside
goes
from
to
the
Las
first two
Vegas.
and the last one, they're named terribly.
Um, yeah, so of course most of our effort and mind is on the forthcoming season 6 with all the Star Wars films, the Alien films, and the Predator films, which will be on Patreon. And we did that because of Alien versus Predator. Of course, we had to cover Predator to tie it in with Alien. But beyond that, we've already been thinking a little bit. We haven't landed on anything 100% yet, but I think Emily and I are both leaning towards a witch season following
Nice.
Star Wars.
Mhm.
So we haven't really come up with a franchise that would be the core of it. So it might just be a bunch of one-offs. Because we already did Dario Argento's Suspiria, because that was originally going to be the franchises, cover all of those. The Mother of Tears trilogy plus the Suspiria remake. But since we already did the first one, probably not. So if you have any suggestions on which franchises that could be the base of that season, let us know.
We definitely will be doing Practical Magic for it, though,
Practical Magic.
with guest star Kay Roloff.
Yep.
Oh, sorry,
That's
that's
interesting because aside from the Blair Witch Project and its associated sequels and remakes, I can't really think of a witch series, a witch
Yeah,
franchise.
there really aren't that many aside from that and Harry Potter, of course, which, like we said, we're not covering. Another one is Halloween Town. We could always cover Halloween Town, but that
I was
feels
gonna
like
say we could do Halloween
Halloween.
Town. There's 4 of them.
Yeah, so I don't know. Oh,
Susanna
Mayfair
suggested
Witches.
Mayfair Witches
Yeah, but that's a TV
Is
show,
that
right? No,
Ooh, that's also a TV show
yeah.
and
So
books. Yeah,
they
Discovery
will
of
definitely be
Witches.
covered as part of our boo tubes for sure. Um,
hmm
yeah, yeah.
Sabrina
So
the Teenage Witch and Charmed will also be boo tubes because I will insist on that.
oh, next
it's
you
Sabrina.
got Willow and Buffy, right?
Yeah, we've done a couple Buffy boo tube movie commentary episodes. Yeah.
Interesting.
And there's still supposed to be one that Susanna and Emily do at some point. We'll
It's
see.
true. It's true from our vampire season. We probably will still do a Buffy one and an Angel one at some point. I'm
Um,
sure.
but after Witches, really anything is a fair game. So this is now season 7 would be Witches. So now thinking like season 8 and beyond, who knows? But some stuff that I really, really cannot wait to cover is I'd love to cover some kaiju films like Godzilla or the legendary stuff. We've talked about doing a Frankenstein franchise of just season of just basically all the versions of Frankenstein
Nice.
out there. We've talked about doing zombies, so that's of course the Of the Living Dead series, but also something like Resident Evil could be one of them, or it could be
World War
to
Z,
cover.
which I
Yeah,
watched for a seminary class.
there's so much out there. So really, the joke that Emily and I have is just we need to keep doing this podcast till the day we die or till the eschaton happens, because there's just so much good content to cover out there, and especially as we branch out a little bit into things like Star Wars and stuff, that just even opens up even further as to what we could cover on the podcast.
Oh, sure.
So
Have you
yeah,
done? Have you talked about Ginger Snaps yet? That's one to hold on to
no,
for
that would
your
be great for a werewolf season. We
werewolf
need.
season. Yeah,
Ooh.
and the Hell House movies. If you haven't seen those, I'm sure you can get something out of that. They're a found footage haunted house kind of thing with
Mm.
a lake of fire and portals to hell
Thought
and
about
evil clowns.
I've thought about haunted houses. We did some haunted house stuff in our ghost season, but
Mhm.
Interesting.
And The Conjuring is up there as one that we definitely will cover sooner than later, especially because they keep making new ones. Um, but those are like so theological, and also the real people that they're based off of are like off the rockers,
Yeah, I was gonna
bizarre.
say total creeps.
Yeah, so it's like I cannot wait to talk about them because they portray them so cool as this amazing, very attractive couple in the movies, and it's
Right,
like Ed and Lorraine Warren were just
hucksters.
weird
yeah.
people. Yeah.
I I also think it would be interesting to do some sort of superhero anti-hero type of one. We just watched, I forgot to mention it at the beginning, we just watched Gen V, which
Hmm.
is a spin-off of
The
Uh,
boy.
The Boys, right?
The Boys. Yeah.
Right.
So just finished that. That is like there is some gore in that show. But that was a really interesting, that would be a really interesting, like similar to the Star Wars, where like it's is it horror? Is it not horror? But we as a podcast think everything can be horror.
Mhm.
And so like diving into that, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, horror, I always find it's something, I think I mentioned it's kind of an aesthetic earlier. I like to think of it more as an aesthetic than a genre. And, my favorite kind of horror is when you layer the horror over some other kind of story. Emily, you mentioned you really like space stuff, and there's tons of
Mhm.
sci-fi horror, there's tons of fantasy horror, superhero horror, probably. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the horror. I don't really even often think of it as a genre. I like to say that horror is the only, although now I have to use the word genre, the only type of storytelling that we really think about. It's named after an emotion. You don't feel sci-fi, you don't feel fantasy, but you feel
Mhm.
horror because horror is something that really grabs you in a different way. Um, and we don't really have any more questions to answer from the crowd, from the people in the audience. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about while we have time here?
I don't know. That's a great
Talk about what's
question.
coming and
Yeah. Um, I think it may be fun since we always have our guests share real life church horror stories. It might be fun if uh Emily, if you have one, I definitely have one I could share, and we could potentially end the podcast, end this episode by sharing real life church horror stories, since you get to hear it from all of you. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. Um,
absolutely.
you go first, Pace. I'm trying to figure out which ones I can tell without
Emily's trying to narrow it
self-incriminating.
down.
Yeah, I'm a pastor in the church. There's a lot.
Yeah, there. Ooh. Okay, I'll tell my there's too many for me, so it's also trying to narrow it down. But I think I told the one about the bones in the graveyard on the podcast before. I think I've told the one about, have I told the ghost horse yet? Okay, I'll tell the ghost horse. I've also told this story on when I guest appeared on Jenny Crean's podcast about the
Dear
Bible.
Reverend.
Their Reverent Bible Talk. Yes, that's the podcast. Thank you. So anyway, this is when I was living in Gettysburg, supposedly the most haunted place in the country, because the Great Civil War battle, the 3-day bloodiest battle of the Civil War that occurred there, in addition to all the genocide and stuff that happened before that to indigenous peoples and stuff in that area. But so I was attending seminary there at a Lutheran seminary. One of the things I would like to do is take late night walks through the battlefield. The seminary is on the battlefield itself and was actually the site of several of the skirmishes, and one of the buildings was used as a makeshift hospital during the Civil War, Schmucker Hall there. Uh, so when I say take a walk through a battlefield, I basically mean just like leaving my apartment and then I'm already on the battlefield. But like there's all these paths there. If you've ever been to Gettysburg, like it's really huge layout of just acres and acres of what nowadays is mostly farmland, but was battlefield at the time. And so I was walking there with a group of friends, and my friend Steve and I kind of we're walking slower than than the rest of our group, because we've gone to a really deep theological discussion, as you do when you're a nerd like Pace.
Mhm.
And so I think we're probably like debating the third use of the law or something super nerdy and technical like that. Uh, and so we're just like talking, and the rest of our friends up ahead, we can see them because they have like flashlights and stuff up ahead of us. And then suddenly, one of the things the battlefield offers is horse tours. So you can go on horse tours throughout the battlefield during the day. This was at night. So it was very strange and bizarre to us when suddenly walking across the street, and then stopping in the middle of the street was this giant horse, like probably 20 feet in front of us, and our friends were probably about 40 feet in front of us. So it's basically in between us and our friend group. And we're like, what is this horse doing at like 9:30 at night on the battlefield, just standing in the middle of the road? And we're like freaked out a little bit because like I don't want to get close to the horse because I don't I don't want to get kicked or something like that.
Mhm.
So we're like, what do we do? What do we do? And then suddenly our friends were going to the one of the monuments. So they made it to the monument and then they turned back and started walking back towards us. As soon as they turned around and their flashlights shone through the horse, and the horse just disappeared. And it was gone. So that's
Ooh.
my real life
Mm,
horror story. And it's church related because I was attending a seminary at the time. So
Ooh.
the
I,
ghost horse of Gettysburg. Nice.
yeah,
yes, yes.
I do not have any supernatural horror stories. I have plenty of other horror stories, because I'm a queer pastor in the church. But I think the one that, um, oh, now I forgot it. Okay, I'm gonna do one of them. It's not the one that I thought of and was like, "Ooh, that one," but I forgot that one. So I'm gonna do the other one that I was thinking of. Um,
The next best.
yeah, you know. So I, as a pastor, tend to talk about the things that are difficult, and pray for the things that are difficult. So in 2014, in my first call, we were asked as a predominantly white denomination, the ELCA, we were asked to pray for Black men and boys who are getting shot by police. And so I pushed a thing on our Facebook. This was my first, like, this was like 3 or 4 months into my first call. Posted a thing on our Facebook and then like made a plan. We were gonna wear black and pray that day. Then next Sunday in worship. And it was our children's pageant thing in Advent. But I like made the post and ended up losing like multiple families from the congregation who were not happy that we were praying for Black men and boys getting killed by the police. And my favorite comment about why somebody was leaving was, they had retired from their job and they said that they did not want to be challenged in their retirement.
Oh,
And so I was like, well, this is not the congregation. Like, I'm not the pastor for you if you do not want to be challenged, because that is literally what our faith calls us to. So that was my like, oof. And there was like a whole bunch more, right? There's a whole bunch more context, a whole bunch more, all these things. But um, when that happened, I was just like, do you like, yeah, there's just a disconnect on what we understood church to be.
Right.
So that was my like main church horror story.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
I think last time, or the first time I was on, Pace asked me this question. I just commented that, well, we just had our annual meeting,
That's some
and
kind of horror story.
we just had our other annual meeting a couple weeks ago, and that's pretty much all I have to say about that. We did get one more question here, which I think might be interesting. From Susanna asks, and then after this we'll wrap it up. What is it like to be a guest on the podcast?
Mm.
Uh, and I guess I would have to answer that because you guys have not been. Well, Emily, you've been a guest before you were a co-host, right?
I was a guest before I was a co-host, but also Susanna and potentially River, who is not required to answer the question because she didn't sign up to answer any questions today. But Susanna and River have also been um, guests on the podcast, so they also could answer. But Ben, you go first. What's it like?
I'm just going to politely wait and see if anybody else raises their hand, but if they don't, I'll jump in. Well, I've had a great time doing it. I think this is maybe now the fifth time I've been on. Pace and I talk, well, text, all the time about horror nerdy stuff. Oh, I just saw this. I just saw this terrible movie. You should watch it because you like terrible movies. Um, and so often, we'll find kind of a common ground. I know Pace knows that I'm a big fan of the Halloween franchise, as they are.
Mm.
And so when the last one came out, Halloween Ends, Pace was like, "Oh, I want to have you back on the show. We're going to talk about this." And I didn't get to see the movie until it had been out for a couple of weeks at that point, and already I had heard people complaining about it, how it was terrible, how it ruined my childhood. As soon as I hear that, I'll back up a little bit and say, I grew up in Berkeley in the 70s and the 80s. And so I'm kind of naturally contrary when it comes to stuff like that. When I hear the herd going in one direction, I will often say, well, then fine. I'm going to watch this movie and I'm going to find 800 reasons to like it, even if I wasn't necessarily going to like it in the first place. So anyway, so I went to
I
see it,
love that.
and we had a great discussion about how much fun we both had with the movie. I think Pace, you're nodding over there. You liked the thing. I
Yeah.
thought it was a great film. And so back to the actual question, what's it like to be a guest on the podcast? It's really just Pace pulled me along a couple times when we had a movie we both knew we liked, or we were both interested in. And then it's just like hanging out and talking with a friend of yours for an hour about something you both really enjoy. Um,
Mhm.
so I think anytime Pace has asked me to be on the show, I've jumped at the chance. We always have a good time. The Lost Boys episode was the first episode that they brought me on for, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And Emily, if
Nice.
you haven't seen it, you have that to look forward to.
Yeah.
It's a little more in the horror comedy realm, but it's a solid version of both. And so yeah, anybody listening who Pace might ever reach out to you and ask you to be on the show, I highly recommend it. It's a good time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it
Oh,
looks like
Dana has an
we've
answer.
got a hand raised.
Yeah. Mhm.
oh, thank you.
We
And
try.
it is allegedly, and I think I agree with this, but it is allegedly one of my superpowers that I'm really good at recommending movies for people. Um,
Hmm.
it's hard for someone like Ben who's seen everything, but for a lot of people who haven't seen that much horror and stuff, I try to pick guests and select movies that I truly think the guests will enjoy and have a lot to talk about. And so, like River was on Everything Everywhere All at Once, and we talked about process theology, and she was also on our Midnight Kiss
Okay.
movie, which is a queer slasher, and that was really fun a while back too. So that's something too. I'm always trying to think of like what do you specifically like, and what do I think what and how that would tie in for a good conversation. So
Hmm. Yeah.
thank you.
That's something that I enjoy also, Pace. Sometimes people will come to me, especially around Halloween, when they're looking for a horror movie to watch with their friends. It's, oh, recommend me a good horror movie. And it's like, well, tell me what you like. Tell me what kind of stuff that you've enjoyed already,
Hmm.
and I'll see if I can give you something. And actually, I'll wind this up, Emily, with another recommendation for you, more for your little one. When they're a little older, 5.5 was a little bit young for this, but my kids love this movie when I guess about 9 years old, the Monster Squad. They wanted to watch a real monster movie for Halloween, and so I showed them the Monster Squad, which is, I think it was maybe PG 13 in 1987, about some kids aging, probably ranging in age from about probably 7 or 8 to early teens, who saved the world from Dracula and Frankenstein and the Wolfman and everything. And it's
Ooh.
it's hilarious and scary at the right times, and when they're a little bit older, I'm sure they'll get a kick out of the Monster Squad.
Yeah.
And I guess we're pretty much wrapping up here, huh?
Yeah.
So where can we, let's see, we're supposed to talk about here, where can we find all you guys? What kind of upcoming projects you've got going on? Pace, aside from shepherding this this podcast into the next few seasons, what else you got working on these days?
Um, I'm trying to get off social media as much as I can. So you can find, which is really hard when you like run a podcast, and identify as a public theologian. So you can find my Facebook page, facebook.com/Pace Warfield, and that's where I put most of my updates on there. I just started writing a blog series for Spirit and Truth about education stuff, so you can look that up. And there's a few TikTok videos I've been Emily's been posting on my behalf mostly. And
We
stuff
just
like that.
started our diaconia.faith TikTok, which I think is just diaconia faith. Just started a series called Kid Theology. So if you have kids who are asking theological questions, you can send them to us and we will answer them. I was having trouble figuring out how to word an answer to a 3-year-old about why did big kid Jesus die. And so Pace helped
Hmm.
me out and gave an answer that worked really well. So
Yep, that was fun. And then the other thing I will shout out is Faith Collective. We've been promising that we're going to be offering classes for a while now. It's going to happen hopefully sooner than later. We're thinking spring right now. So keep
Nice.
your eyes posted for and ears and other
other body parts.
sensory body parts posted to our Faith Facebook and other places, Blue Sky, X, all that stuff. For more information about that when that comes out, River will be offering a few classes as well, probably. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
And then I'm
Nice.
also working on my dissertation. So I'll probably defend it sometime in the spring and then look for that being published at some point if I ever finish the darn thing.
You will.
I've known so many people who have had to defend their dissertations. My brother's a professor at Santa Cruz, and my dad was a professor. I always think defending your dissertation would be a lot more fun if there were like swords involved,
Right.
Right?
That's
There
what
are
I
some people that
lightsabers
when they
maybe.
get their PhD, they get swords in like, I don't know if it's Scotland or somewhere in Europe.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
swords.
My brother is a professor of archaeology, so unless he digs one up in the backyard, I don't think he's getting one anytime soon.
That's fair. That's fair.
And Emily, what about you? What are you up to? What do you got coming up?
Yeah, you can definitely, I do probably more social mediaing than Pace, which is not that hard to do. Um, so you can find me on Blue Sky at Queer Pastor or Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Rev_Ewing. The TikTok verse is my like Brooke, who submitted a question, friend of the podcast, and I do Sabbath sips together. But I've been doing a lot of art and some roll for sermon, random preaching, uh, and I've been starting to do some praying in color and leading a group on Zoom for that. So if you're interested, you can contact me, and I will let you know when that is coming up. But yeah, I'm around way too much on social media.
Nice. As far as me, I'll talk to myself for a second and a half here. You can find more about me right up there at benmonroe.com. Like Pace, I'm kind of dialing it back on social media these days. It was getting to be a little too much. I think I had like maybe 4 or 5 different accounts, and then the other day I was thinking about, Emily, maybe you'll get the joke. A scene in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where a whole species was cursed with telepathy, and every random thought they had was broadcast to the entire universe. And like that sort of was starting how I was kind of feeling on social media. So I'm
Yeah.
taking a step back. But go to benmonroe.com, and in the about section, you can find links to wherever I happen to be at the time. And I've got books coming out. You'll find links to my books and short stories and things there. And I guess that's it for me. So next up, you guys are doing. You want to talk Pace about the next episode, Star Wars from a certain
Sure.
point of view, Empire Strikes Back.
Yep. So our next episode is another book episode. Star Wars Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view, a collection of 40 short stories, all told from different characters' perspectives, in celebration of the 40th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back that came out a few years ago. So that's going to come out in December. At some point, we're going to do, from a certain point of view, Return of the Jedi, but now we're starting to push into our Star Wars movies we're covering, so who knows when that one will happen. But those are our last two book episodes to come. And then on Christmas, stay tuned Christmas Day for a special Star Wars themed episode. You can guess what release of Star Wars we will be covering on Christmas.
On
And
purpose.
on purpose, believe it or
That's
not.
the real trick. That's the real horror.
And so if scheduling allows, Ben, you're going to join us again for that one. So we're excited so you
Absolutely.
can hear more of Ben and also hear our thoughts on that abysmal entry into the Star Wars universe.
And I promise not to sing the song.
Mm.
All right. Well, I guess we're done. Well, it's nice talking to you all. So that's it for this live episode. The theme music was by Matt May. Horror Nerds at Church releases every Thursday, like it or not. Find Horror Nerds at Church wherever you get your podcasts and on Facebook and Instagram at Horror Nerds at Church and Twitter and Blue Sky at HNAC Pod. Support Horror Nerds at Church on Patreon and get access to exclusive movie commentary episodes, Boo-Too episodes, and more bonus content by going to patreon.com/horror nerds at church. That's AT, not a little at symbol. Don't do that. Something else entirely. It's only $5 to sign up, cheaper than a glass of Bantha milk at the Mos Eisley Cantina. Until next time, watch scary movies. Keep America strong.
Love it.